fifth graders. It feels good to be teaching again. I've missed you so much. Earlier today, I was in the classroom and I just looked around, and it's just so weird that you guys aren't there. But I'm glad that we can still be learning together, doing these YouTube videos. I hope you guys enjoy them. I don't know if I really like doing them that much, but it's worth it if it gets the teaching out there to you guys. So I am going to be doing a lot of the reading lessons, and Miss Gibbons will be doing a lot of the writing lessons. And we might switch too. And Miss James can do some of the reading lessons too, so it's really exciting. Today, we're going to talk a little bit about fantasy, and then we're going to jump into our first lesson about setting. Okay? So the question you might be having is, why even do fantasy? Why should we read fantasy? If you're like me, I didn't care for fantasy when I was younger until I got older and I tried it finally. I loved it, and I still love reading fantasy. So, fantasy does some really great things for us as readers. One, it does help us grow. It doesn't mean that it's hard to read, it's just that it's a little more complex. The characters are a little more complex. They have problems, outward problems that you like see, but like inward problems that have to be dealt with as well. And they have to deal with characters sometimes that are mean. Um, and so they just face a lot of different problems. And with that, another thing that fantasy does is it teaches us lessons. It teaches us about the lives of others and how they deal with them, and then we can apply them to our own lives too. So fantasy is kind of cool that way. Um, so let's dive in. With fantasy, you want to look closely at setting. Now, when you think setting, when you were younger, you thought place and time. Like those two things made up setting. Well, in fantasy, you still need to know those things, but you also need to ask yourself a deeper question. You need to ask yourself, what type of place is this? So, an answer to that might be it's a safe place, or maybe this setting is a dangerous place, or this setting is mysterious and you're really unsure about what's going to happen next, right? Might be a foreboding place. Okay, so there's different settings throughout any fantasy book, and you really want to be paying attention to those settings. When you first jump into your book, it's a great time to think about setting. Okay, I'm going to give you 3 different settings that fantasy books are usually in. Okay, so usually there is possibly the medieval world. So medieval, think Middle Ages, horses, um, palaces, crowns. Um, Dragons, possibly, right? So the medieval world is that old time, middle age time. Then there's also the futuristic world. That is a world that it reminds you of the world we live in now, but it's full of problems. Like there's these problems that are just out there that have to be dealt with. And last, it's the ordinary world with magic. So think Harry Potter. Very ordinary at first, right? A boy living with his aunt and uncle until things start happening, right? Magical things start happening. So those are the 3 worlds that usually you'll find. You'll find the medieval, you might find the futuristic, or your book might be the ordinary world with magic. Okay? So how do we find the setting that it is we look for clues. And it's really simple how we do it at first. When you get a book first off, don't just dive in reading, okay? We've had lessons about this before. You want to take a look at the book. And I'm going to use the Paper Bag Princess. It's a picture book, so I'll lean more heavily on pictures than you will. You'll lean more heavily on text because I gave you um, chapter books. So when I look at this book, I might first go to the back and look for a blurb. But there is no blurb. So then I have to go, okay, cover. And I can start taking a look at the cover and I start noticing some things. So I might notice that, okay, here's a girl. I'm not sure what's going on here, but I think I see a little bit of a crown. There's a dragon. I'm starting to think possibly it's a medieval world, but it doesn't give me a whole lot of clues. Princess usually has something to do with medieval. Okay, so I'm kind of leaning toward medieval. Next, you start reading. And this is what I'd expect you to do with your books that you got, okay, from Miss Gibbons and I. So the Paper Bag Princess, I'll read just a little bit of it, and we'll just kind of together be thinking about what kind of world is this. And we might decide it's medieval. I'm already leaning toward that, but I want you to be thinking, what kind of place is this? Okay. Elizabeth was a beautiful princess. She lived in a castle and had expensive princess clothes. She was going to marry a prince named Ronald. Okay, so first, crowns. Looks like a big castle door, definitely a throne here. So this is medieval. And so I would take a moment, and I hope you do this too, is when you start noticing things, you should jot. So either a sticky note if you have them, or a piece of paper, or like I have my notebook with me. So when I'm reading my fantasy book, I'm going to have this with me, and I hope you do too. So just open it up, and you can see at the top I've already written Paper Bag Princess for May 4, 2020. You'll see there's notes here already. It's because I've already done this video once and it didn't work. So these were the notes that I wrote earlier. So I'm just going to read them to you instead of redoing it. So I just wrote, I'm looking at the setting, and then I noticed there's dragon, there's crowns, a prince, a princess. These are all things I just talked to you about. Medieval. It's medieval setting. Now, how important is that? Probably pretty important, but the bigger, more important question that fifth graders need to be asking is what type of world is this besides just being medieval? When I read on, I think we'll get a little more hint. You'll find that too. You should be reading at first like 3 chapters to really get an idea of what kind of world your character is living in. Unfortunately, a dragon smashed her castle, burned all her clothes with his fiery breath, and carried off Prince Ronald. Well, this tells me that the world that Elizabeth lives in seemed to be a charming world, a world where she had everything planned out and everything was going just fine. Until, dun dun dun, this is not a charming world that she lives in. In fact, I think I would use the word unsafe. I think I might call this even violent. A violent change came and took everything from her. Her castle's gone, her clothes are gone, and her prince is gone. Okay? So, as a reader, we know that we don't just keep reading past those clues, we write them down. So, what I was writing earlier is this is an unsafe, unpredictable place where you are left alone to fend for yourself. I just quickly wrote that sentence. Okay? So sometimes our jots are just words, but then it's more of our thoughts afterward. Okay? Miss Gibbons, Miss James, and I are going to expect you to be writing about your reading. Okay? That's what fifth graders do now. All right? Sometimes we write jots like this, and sometimes we write long in our notebooks. And I'll talk more about that in another lesson. Okay? So today and every day, as you guys are reading your books, I really want you to pay attention to the clues that tell you about the setting and tell you about what kind of setting is, what kind of place this is. You can write sticky notes as you go. You can write in your notebook as you go, but have something to talk about when you meet with Miss Gibbons or with me, Miss James, in your team meetings later today. Okay? So we can't wait to see you then. We can't wait to hear about your book and the setting, the things you've noticed. And of course, if you notice things about the characters and other things, please jot those down. Okay? Can't wait to see you guys.